Zodiac, a symbol that now stands for terror in San Francisco. Today there was a possibly significant development in the terrifying case of the man who calls himself Zodiac and has boasted that he is responsible for 5 murders in the last 9 months. In Zodiac's latest letter last week, he threatened to make a busload of school children his next victims.
In the late 1960s and early 1970s, news spread that sent chills down the spines of the residents of the San Francisco Bay Area. A series of brutal crimes were committed by an unknown killer, who murdered his victims in cold blood without any apparent reason or common connection between them. He called himself Zodiac and designed a distinctive symbol. He continued to taunt the police and journalists with provocative letters, in which he confessed to his crimes and threatened to commit more. He always ended his letters with mysterious ciphers, challenging the police and the public to decode them. Despite confessing to 37 murders, the police were only able to prove 5 of them. Thus, the Zodiac Killer case became one of the most complicated and mysterious criminal puzzles in history. Welcome, and today I'll tell you the story of the Zodiac Killer. In July 1963, Lombok High School in Santa Barbara County, Southern California, was bidding farewell to a new batch of students. At that time, most high schools would hold a special day for the senior class, giving them time off to celebrate together, much like a graduation party. Indeed, the students had agreed on a specific location to celebrate and gathered there, except for one student, an 18-year-old named Robert Domingos. Robert decided to take his classmate Linda Edwards, who was a year younger than him, to a nearby beach to celebrate. They were supposed to spend the day there, and then Robert would drop Linda off at her house. But as the hours passed, the day ended without their return. When Wednesday arrived and they still hadn't returned, Robert's father became worried and went to the beach to search for them. What he found there was shocking. He discovered the bodies of Robert and Linda lying inside an abandoned shack on the beach. He immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene and uncovered horrific details. The killer had tied their hands with ropes and shot 11 bullets into Robert and 9 bullets into Linda using a Winchester Western Super X.22 rifle. Afterward, the killer dragged their bodies into the shack and tried to set them on fire, but failed due to the old matches he had used. He left the place and fled. What made things even more mysterious was that the criminal investigation found no fingerprints or evidence to indicate the identity of the killer. There was no sign of theft or sexual assault, and neither of the victims had any known enemies who could be suspects. The crime seemed completely unprovoked, as if the killer had stumbled upon them and decided to kill them for no apparent reason. 3 years after this tragic event, on October 30th, 1966, 18-year-old student Sherry Bates left her home in Riverside, California. Between 4:30 and 5 p.m. that day, she left a note for her father, who was at work, telling him she was going to the university library to do some research. Sherry took her car and headed to the library. When her father returned home around 10 p.m. and read her note, he waited for her to return. But time passed, and after midnight, Sherry still hadn't returned, even though the library closed at 9 p.m. At 5:30 a.m., Sherry's father decided to call the police and report her disappearance. At nearly the same time, a report came into the Riverside Police Department from a security guard working in the area, stating that a young woman's body had been found on the highway near the Riverside University Library garage. Immediately, police officers went to the scene, where they discovered that the body, lying between 2 abandoned houses, was that of the missing Sherry. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to the chest, neck, and shoulder with a 7-centimeter knife. Next to her body, they found her handbag, containing all of her personal belongings, including her wallet and money, which confirmed that the crime was not committed for robbery. Her car was still in the library garage, meaning the killer did not attempt to steal it either. Investigators suspected that the killer had somehow disabled Sherry's car and then convinced her to accompany him to give her a ride. Once they had moved away from the garage, he carried out the crime. The only positive aspect of the incident was that Sherry seemed to have felt threatened before her death and tried to resist the killer, as evidenced by the presence of skin and brown hair remnants under her nails. The police also found a broken wristwatch near the body, which appeared to have been ripped from the killer's wrist during Sherry's struggle. Additionally, they discovered military boot prints at the crime scene, which are shoes only sold in military outlets and are restricted to military ID holders. Despite this evidence, the investigation failed to identify the true killer. There was significant suspicion surrounding a young man who had previously been in a relationship with Sherry. Investigators believe their breakup might have been a motive for the crime, but the evidence at the crime scene did not match his description. However, he was not completely ruled out as a suspect and remained under surveillance and investigation. A month after the incident, on November 29th, two identical typewritten letters arrived, one at the police department and the other at the Riverside newspaper. The letters were titled Confession. They contained specific details about the crime that only the killer and the investigators knew. In the letter, the killer mocked the victim and stated that he was not sick, but insane. The following day, another handwritten letter arrived at the police, the press, and Sherry's father. The letter read,
Bates had to die, and there are more to come.
It was signed with the letter Z or the number 2. 6 months after the incident, a library guard discovered a poem carved into a wooden desk in the library. The poem was strange and unsettling, describing the enjoyment of killing, adding further mystery to the case. Of course, the investigators took the poem and added it to the rest of the evidence. More than a year passed until December 20th, 1968, just 5 days before Christmas. On that day, 17-year-old David Vardy decided to visit the family of his classmate Betty Jansen to ask for permission to take their daughter to a party, promising to return her by 11 p.m. However, David and Betty had a completely different plan in mind. They decided to drive to Herman Lake to spend the day together. They followed through with their plan, but at 11:20 p.m. that night, a driver passing by noticed a car stopped in the middle of the road, its doors open and windows shattered. The man got out to investigate and was shocked to find a body lying next to the car. David had been shot in the head, while Betty had received 5 gunshot wounds to her back and was lying in a pool of blood. When the police arrived and began investigating, they concluded that the killer had first shot at the car to intimidate the victims and force them to get out. As David tried to get out of the car, one of the bullets struck him directly in the head. Betty, in a panic, tried to run away, but the killer shot her 5 times in the back. What was striking was that when the shell casings were analyzed, investigators discovered that the killer had used a Winchester Western Super X.22 caliber rifle, the same weapon used in the first 2 murders. However, the 2 incidents were not connected at the time due to the different locations and the long gap between them, and the case was also recorded as unsolved. 6 more months passed until July 4th, 1969. On that day, 22-year-old Darlene Fern, a wife and mother, left her job at a popular restaurant in California. She then met a 19-year-old man named Mike Majo. The two of them drove to a parking lot in the Blue Rock area around midnight. Suddenly, another car entered the lot, and a person got out, holding a flashlight and shining it on Darlene and Mike. The person then began to approach them step by step. At first, they thought he was a police officer, but he quickly pulled out a 9mm pistol and, without warning, fired 5 shots at them before leaving the scene. Mike Majo, who was still conscious despite his severe injuries, began groaning in pain. The killer heard his groans, returned to the car, and fired 2 more shots at them before completely disappearing from the crime scene. Luckily for Mike, the bullets only hit his jaw, shoulder, and legs, and he survived. As for Darlene, she was shot in vital areas of her body, which led to her immediate death. When the police arrived at the scene, Mike Majo was unconscious and was immediately rushed to the intensive care unit. At first, suspicion fell on Darlene's husband, with a motive being a suspected marital affair. However, investigations revealed that at the time of the incident, he had been working his shift at a California restaurant and had no connection to the event. A few hours into the investigation, the police station received a call from a payphone. The caller was unidentified and spoke in a calm voice, saying,
I want to report a murder 17 kilometers east of Columbus Road. You will find a young man and woman in a brown car, shot with a 9mm pistol. I did that, and I also killed others like them last year.
The call ended, and no one could trace the caller's identity. 77 days later, 3 different newspapers received identical letters: the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The letters were handwritten and postmarked, with the sender claiming responsibility for the recent murders, as well as the one before Christmas. To confirm his involvement, the sender provided precise details about the crimes that only the investigators knew, such as the number of shots, the type of weapon used, the victim's clothing, and even their positions on the ground. The letter included a threat that he would kill more people if his letters were not published on the front page of the newspapers by August 1st. The sender concluded with a symbol of a circle with 2 crossed lines, which no one could decipher. Along with the letters, he sent 3 ciphers made up of strange symbols, challenging the police and readers to decode them, claiming that whoever cracked the codes would know his identity. Despite the shock by the content of the letters, the police asked the sender to provide more details to verify if he was truly the killer. On August 4th, a new 3-page letter was sent to the San Francisco Examiner. In this letter, he mocked the police and described very specific details about his last crime involving Mike Majo and Darlin. He also expressed his frustration with the Examiner newspaper for publishing his previous letter on page 4 instead of the first page, as he had requested. He used the same symbol as before, but this time he referred to himself as Zodiac, the alias he would use for the first time. On August 8th, police received news that a high school teacher named Donald Harden, with the help of his wife Betty, had managed to decipher the Zodiac cipher published in the newspapers. The cipher read,
I love killing because it's so much fun. It's even more enjoyable than hunting wild animals in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal to kill. Killing humans gives me a more exciting experience. The best part is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and those I killed will be my slaves. I won't tell you my name or my description so that you don't interfere with my plan to gather as many slaves as possible.
At this point, the police were sure that the cipher Zodiac was sending contained no explicit information about his identity, as he had claimed. Meanwhile, Mike Majo, who was still hospitalized, had begun regaining consciousness and started recalling the details of the incident little by little. He told the investigators that the person who attacked them was in his late 20s or early 30s, with fair skin, brown hair, a round face, a slightly overweight build, and about 170 centimeters tall. However, these details were very general, and they couldn't identify the perpetrator based on this description. Days passed until September 27, 1969. On that day, 2 college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were spending the day at Lake Berryessa, about 50 kilometers from Napa County in California. In the middle of the day, they noticed someone acting strangely, as if watching them from behind the trees. The person had fair skin, a slightly overweight build, and was wearing glasses. Soon after, they were startled to see him standing in front of them, wearing a long mask covering his head, with a circle and 2 intersecting lines drawn on his chest, the same symbol Zodiac had used in his letters. He had a belt around his waist with a knife hanging from it, and was holding a gun aimed at them. He told them in a firm voice,
Give me all the money you have and the car keys.
He informed them that he had escaped from prison after killing a guard and was heading to Mexico. Brian tried to negotiate with him to avoid any harm, convincing him that he would help. But the attacker was nervous and refused to negotiate. He pulled out a clothesline hidden in his belt and ordered Cecilia to tie up Brian. After she finished, he pulled out another rope and tied her up as well. Suddenly, without warning, he took out the knife and said,
It's time for you to die.
He then stabbed Brian 6 times in the back and Cecilia 10 times. Afterward, he went to Brian's car, wrote the dates of the previous 2 incidents as well as the new one, September 27th, on the car, along with the type of weapon used, a knife, and drew his symbol on the car's body. He then left the scene. At 7:40 p.m., a call came from a payphone to the Napa Police Department. The caller, who remained unidentified, reported the murder, giving an exact location and describing Brian's car. Before ending the call, the caller said,
I am the killer.
The police arrived quickly at the beach and found Brian and Cecilia still alive. They were rushed to the hospital, but Cecilia died there, while doctors managed to save Brian, who began to recount the details of the incident. During the investigation, clear footprints from military boots were found, similar to those found at previous crime scenes. The depth of the footprint in the sand indicated that the perpetrator was heavy, which matched the description given by the witnesses. 14 days passed, and the police were still unable to track down Zodiac despite intensive efforts. On the night of October 11th, 1969, a taxi driver named Paul Stein went out to pick up a passenger for a ride to a wealthy neighborhood in San Francisco. At the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, three siblings were standing on the second floor of a building. They noticed the taxi suddenly stop in the middle of the road and observed strange behavior from the person sitting next to the driver. They focused more and discovered that the driver had been shot in the head and was bleeding heavily, while the person next to him was searching his pockets, taking his wallet and car keys. He then tore a piece of the driver's shirt, dipped it in his blood, and kept it in his pocket. Afterward, he began wiping his fingerprints off the car before walking away from the scene. The siblings were shocked but quickly called the police and reported what they had seen. They described the person as wearing glasses and having a slightly overweight build, but they could not make out his features clearly due to the darkness. However, they mentioned that his skin appeared dark, possibly influenced by the prevailing biases of the time, as accusations were often directed at people with darker skin. The police arrived quickly at the scene and began searching the surrounding area. They found a man with a slightly overweight build wearing glasses near the crime scene, but they let him go because his skin was white. After investigating and lifting fingerprints from the taxi, they couldn't find any useful evidence due to the numerous fingerprints left by various passengers who had previously used the car. The case was ultimately classified as an ordinary robbery. It seems this upset Zodiac, who felt they had downplayed his actions. The next day, he sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, claiming responsibility for killing the taxi driver. He also included detailed information about the crime. The piece of shirt that he tore and soaked in the victim's blood was used in his letter to show the failure of the police to identify him. He told them,
I was very close to the scene, and if you had searched well, you would have found me among the trees.
He also threatened that he would one day blow up a school bus full of children. He then stamped the letter with fingerprints from 3 fingers, and no one has been able to identify them to this day. On November 8th, he sent another piece of the shirt to the press, along with a greeting card as a form of provocation. He also sent a cipher made of 340 symbols, threatening to kill more victims. The following day, November 9th, he sent the longest letter of his criminal history, 7 pages long, mocking the police as usual. He admitted that he was the person whom the police had encountered during the taxi incident and whom they had let walk away. He also attached a drawing of explosives to the letter. After that, he disappeared completely for more than a month. On December 20th, he sent a second letter, this time to a famous lawyer named Melvin Belly. He told him,
I can't control myself, and I'm afraid I will kill again. This time, it will be victim number 9 or 10. The children are still safe because I couldn't finish the bomb, and it will take me a long time. If I don't kill someone now, I'll have enough time to complete it. Please help me.
Melvin contacted the police and agreed to try to negotiate with Zodiac so they could capture him, but Zodiac did not send any more letters afterward. On March 22nd, 1970, Kathleen Johns, 22 years old, was driving with her infant daughter Jennifer on their way to visit her mother in Northern California. While driving on the highway, a car appeared behind her and started flashing its lights and honking until she slowed down. The person driving the car pulled up next to her and told her that there was a problem with the right wheel and that he could help her. Both cars pulled over to the side of the road, and the man, who was wearing neat clothes, had a slightly overweight build, and wore glasses, got out with his tools and began removing the wheel to install the spare. After he said goodbye to Kathleen, he got back into his car. But after Kathleen drove a short distance, the wheel completely detached from its place, forcing her to stop in a deserted area. The man passed by again in his car, stopped beside her, and offered to drive her to the nearest gas station. At that time, Kathleen was 7 months pregnant and unable to walk that distance, and since it was getting late, she agreed to have him accompany her. Throughout the drive, she felt uneasy about his behavior as he suddenly changed speeds, either accelerating too much or slowing down too drastically. They passed 2 gas stations, but he refused to stop, claiming that they didn't offer services. At one point, Kathleen began to feel that something was strange and realized he was acting abnormally. At one moment, she grabbed her daughter and jumped out of the car down a slope filled with trees. While she was running, she noticed that he stopped his car and got out. He watched her for a short time, then calmly returned to his car and disappeared completely. At that moment, Kathleen encountered another person on the road who noticed she was terrified and decided to accompany her to the nearest police station. There, she described the person she had encountered, and they were able to identify a composite sketch of the Zodiac. She confirmed that it was the same person who had been in the car with her. When the police went to retrieve her car, they found it completely burned, leading them to believe that Zodiac had set it on fire. A few days after the incident, an explosion occurred in one of the police departments, and Zodiac was accused of being behind it. However, on April 20th, he sent a letter to the Chronicle newspaper clearing himself of the explosion. He explained that he had been planning to blow up a school bus as he had previously mentioned, but the bomb malfunctioned due to the rain. On April 28th, he sent another letter asking them to publish his intellectual plans, stating that all residents of the San Francisco Bay Area should wear pins with his symbol. On June 26th, he sent another letter containing a map of the San Francisco area, saying that he had killed more victims, but the police were unable to reach them. On July 24th, he sent a letter complaining that people had not heeded his advice and had not worn the symbol. He confirmed in the same letter that he was responsible for the failed kidnapping of a mother and her daughter. In May 1970, there was a case of a woman named Donna Lass going missing. Donna had worked at the Letterman Hospital near the taxi incident site, but later moved to work at a hotel in the Lake Tahoe area for no apparent reason. The day before she disappeared, she called her boss at 1:50 a.m. and said that Donna wouldn't be able to come to work because she had left town due to family circumstances, even though her car was parked near her house and hadn't moved. After investigations, it was revealed that there were no family circumstances and no one knew where she was or what happened to her. However, since Zodiac had sent a postcard in his recent letters advertising apartments in the Lake Tahoe area, investigators linked her disappearance to him. Although this was the last recorded incident in which Zodiac was suspected, he continued sending letters, insisting that his victim count was rising, and it eventually reached 37 victims. On March 13, 1971, he officially confessed in one of his letters that he was the one who killed Sherry Bates, the library victim in 1966. His bizarre letters continued to arrive intermittently until 1974, after which he disappeared, and his identity was never discovered due to the complexities surrounding the Zodiac cases. The number of suspects rose to over 350 people, but only a few were suspected more than others. The first and most suspicious person was Arthur Lee Allen, due to the strong similarities between him and Zodiac in many characteristics, such as a stocky build, round face, brown hair, and white skin. Additionally, he had served in the U.S. Navy at one point in his life, and one of his friends confirmed seeing him several times wearing military boots. He also owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch that featured a symbol similar to the one used by the killer. He was also writing a novel about a killer who murders his victims and tells the police details of his crimes. Moreover, he lived near the locations where Zodiac's confirmed crimes had occurred. Several people confirmed that his behavior was erratic and that he caused problems wherever he went. After finishing his service in the Navy, he worked as a high school teacher and was expelled between 1962 and 1963 after a gun filled with ammunition was discovered in his car. This was the period when Zodiac's first incident occurred. After being dismissed from the school, he worked at another school called Valley Springs and was expelled from there as well in 1968. His colleagues said that he was an alcoholic, and they were more suspicious of his behavior because he rarely took vacations. The only day they remembered him taking sick leave was the day he killed a victim named Sherry Bates, the only victim who had a physical altercation with Zodiac and managed to injure him. Additionally, the victims Betty and Freddie, who were killed in 1968, were only 7 minutes away from Allen's house. Delaney Majo, who was also attacked in 1969, lived just 4 minutes from his home, as did the incident involving Brian and Cecilia being stabbed in 1969. Some people claimed to have seen Allen carrying a knife with blood on it, but when the police questioned him, he told them he had been slaughtering chickens. After a while, a man named Ralph Spiney came forward and told the police that he knew Allen and that Allen had confessed to being the Zodiac Killer. He also claimed that Allen said he would kill a taxi driver in San Francisco. However, the officer who took the report dismissed it until the crime occurred. When the police questioned Allen in 1971, Zodiac's letters stopped for 2.5 years. This coincided with the period when Allen was imprisoned in 1974 for child molestation. In 1992, the year Allen died, police went to Michael Majo, the survivor of the attack, who described Allen's features and was shown a picture of him. When he saw it, he screamed and said, "That's the guy who shot at me a long time ago. Why didn't they take this picture during the investigations?" When asked why he hadn't mentioned it before, he said, "I don't know." But despite this evidence, Zodiac's fingerprints, skin, hair, and handwriting did not match Allen's, and they could not prove whether he was Zodiac or not. Another suspect, who was considered more likely than others, was Richard Gaikowski, the editor-in-chief of the Good Times newspaper, who was interested in publishing Zodiac's crimes. He came under suspicion due to his strong resemblance to the Zodiac Killer sketch. Moreover, the office of the newspaper he ran was only 1 kilometer away from the location where the taxi driver was killed. Before becoming the newspaper's editor, Richard had worked as a doctor in the Army. The way the taxi driver's shirt was cut was a common practice taught to doctors in the field, especially in wartime, to use it as a dressing for wounds. This practice was rare among the general public. The only day Zodiac did not send a letter was Wednesday, which was the busiest day at the newspaper, and Richard was occupied all day. Additionally, there was a significant similarity between his handwriting and Zodiac's. Furthermore, some of the names that frequently appeared in Zodiac ciphers, such as RG, GY, and KE, could have been abbreviations of his name. Some people reported having seen Richard at the funerals of some of the victims, even though he had no connection to them. Others noticed his odd behavior, and he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1974, the same year Zodiac's letters stopped. However, investigations confirmed that his fingerprints and hair did not match the samples the police had, and he was ruled out, just like Allen. As a result, the identity of the Zodiac Killer and his ciphers remain a mystery to this day. Thus, we have reached the end of the story. I look forward to your feedback, and if you have a story you would like us to share, write it in the comments. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and commenting. For those who want to hear this story on Spotify or dive deeper into the details, you can get the full ebook, which contains additional events and exclusive insights not covered in this video. You'll find all the links in the description below.